Good evening and welcome back to the lecture, the current affair lecture series that we have been doing. Today I have taken very important topics from the happenings of the last week. We'll be proceeding from the first one that we have at hand today, the Biological Diversity Amendment Bill 2021. Okay. Why news? Because there have been many holes, there has been a lot of criticism and there has been a lot of discussion on the merits of the bill and the matters of the bill. So I have taken this because this was in news in the Hindu as well. So there are holes in the biodiversity bill and we'll be looking at what the Biodiversity Act 2002 does. When did India sign the Biodiversity Convention, the Cartagena Protocol, Nagoya Protocol, and what does these two protocols say about the biosafety rules and the safe transfer and access and benefit sharing of the biodiversity. And then we'll be looking at how this amendment makes changes into that original bill, that is the National Biodiversity Act 2002. Okay. So it was introduced in December 2021 and then it was sent to Joint Parliamentary Committee. The Parliamentary Committee is different from a cabinet committee in the sense that Parliamentary Committee is the committee of Parliament to keep a check on the executive or the government. Okay. So it was introduced in Lok Sabha and then it was sent to the Joint Parliamentary Committee for the reviewing of the clauses of the bill. Okay. Fine. So what it primarily does is it amends the Biological Diversity Act 2002 to simplify the compliance rules for foreign and domestic companies. Basically, what it does is to promote more research, more commercialization of the genetic resources and their utilization in the sector of medicine and all. It tries to simplify the compliance norms. Okay. Users of codified traditional, one important point to note here that this bill does is it exempts the users of codified traditional knowledge. In an attempt to promote the Ayush or the traditional medicine system in India, the bill has now brought about leniency in the application of access and benefit sharing norms that we'll be looking forward what this access and benefit sharing refers to in a while. And of course, in the pursuit of improving the traditional medicine in India, okay, so the bill basically brings about a leniency in access to the genetic resources because the traditional medicine in India, basically Ayurveda, Unani, so all these medicine systems heavily rely upon the herbs and the other medicinal plants that are found in the wild. But to access them is not so easy because of the presence of Biodiversity Act 2002. We'll be looking at how the Biodiversity Act limits the access to the genetic resources of the country. Okay. So the bill removes research and biosurvey activities from the purview of benefit sharing requirements. Okay. So first of all, we are having an eagle's eye view as to what the bill does, and then we'll be looking into the detailed section as to every clause as to what it does in the original act. Okay. So it removes the research and biosurvey. Okay. To promote more research, it removes the clause that was included in the earlier act, the Biodiversity Act 2002, that mandated the benefit sharing from a research activity. If any research activity leads to formation of some commercial product, the benefit of that product in the form of intellectual property, in the form of monetary benefit, or in terms of other non-monetary benefits has to be provided to the conservers or the growers of the biodiversity. Okay. Not only conservers and the growers of the biodiversity, but also to the people who have the associated knowledge with that specific biodiversity. Okay. Now, benefit sharing will be based on terms agreed. This clause is very important and we'll be looking at this clause in detail as to why this is important, because now the term in the earlier act, in the Biological Diversity Act 2002, what happened was the National Biodiversity Authority that is located in Chennai, NBA, the National Biodiversity Authority was the body that mandated the amount of that mandated that the benefit should be shared between the people who are the conservers of the biodiversity and the people who are accessing that biodiversity for commercialization, basically companies. Okay, means indigenous communities, ठीक है, जो indigenous communities which live in the forests or such areas where such biodiversity grows, so those people will have a share in the benefit that arises from the commercialization of the biodiversity that is being used for medicinal or any other purposes. ठीक है? So now what has happened is that now it has been made as it in the terms agreed between the user and the local management committees. What earlier was कि biodiversity committee, the local management committees, which are the committees at the ground level, which maintain a register of all the biodiversity in the surrounding area. Those communities had a very strong say in the use of biodiversity. Now that has been diluted. We'll be looking at how it has been diluted. Okay? And the very important term, the very important clause that this bill does, it decriminalizes all the offences and instead brings about a financial penalty from rupees 1 lakh to rupees 50 lakh. Okay, it decriminalizes, means if you are not complying to the Biological Diversity Act 2002, you will not be jailed anymore, but there will be a financial penalty being imposed upon the violator. So these are the basic provisions of the bill which we are going to look into, right? Now, evolution of law on biodiversity. So in 1992, Convention on Biodiversity was signed. In 1992, Convention on Biodiversity was signed. What is biodiversity? First of all, biodiversity is the amount of flora and fauna that grows in a specific or that is found in a specific area. That the amount of that diversity will be called the biodiversity of that specific area. Okay. So if there is singular kind of plant grown, or if there is one kind of animal found in a specific area, okay, so it will be having very low biodiversity. Okay. On the contrast, if an area is having a large number of different type of animals and plants, then that area will be having a large or a huge amount of biodiversity. The biodiversity is a natural resource and it is one of the most important economic resources for humanity, because almost every product that we see is derived from biodiversity. Okay, like wood, medicines, fruits, food, everything is part of biodiversity. Okay. Okay, then 1992 in the Rio conference, okay, the Rio Earth conference that was held in Rio de Janeiro, India signed this convention on in 1994, and then in 2002 India brought about its own Biodiversity Act to comply with the clauses of the Convention on Biodiversity. It means all the companies who have signed this convention on biodiversity, they have to bring about a law protecting the domestic biodiversity of that country. Okay, so India signed it in 1994 and the Biodiversity Act was brought in 2002. Through this act, okay, so this is very important act and this is the singular act that protects biodiversity in India. Biodiversity, okay. There is another Wildlife Protection Act, 1972, EPA 1986, okay, Environmental Protection Act 1986, but all these are specific acts, okay. All these are not specific, sorry, these are generalized acts, like Wildlife Protection Act. It is dealing specifically with wildlife, okay, and about the protection of wildlife. And this act, Environmental Protection Act, that deals with the protection of environment in itself, okay. But none of the act provides for utilization of biodiversity, okay. Although they deal with protection of biodiversity, okay, protection, but none of them set any kind of framework for access and benefit sharing, basically. Benefit sharing means sharing the benefit that arises from the utilization of bioresources to the indigenous communities that are protecting and conserving those biodiversity. ठीक है. तो Biodiversity Act 2002 was brought. Under it, National Biodiversity Authority was formed. It is headquartered in Chennai. ठीक है. This was a question in UPSC prelims कि where is National Biodiversity Authority situated? It was a question in 2019, I guess. Okay. And then there were two other protocols accessory to the Convention on Biodiversity signed. There were two protocols. The first one is Cartagena Protocol and the second one is Nagoya Protocol. Nagoya is a place in Japan. Okay. Nagoya Protocol. Cartagena Protocol talks about biosafety, whereas Nagoya Protocol talks about access and benefit sharing. We'll be looking at what these protocols are in a very brief. So very important point to note about this. Okay. Biodiversity Act Biodiversity Act 2002. Okay. We'll be looking at the basic framework of this act and how it provided for the protection, access and benefit sharing. Okay. The whole act is based on three foundational things. The first one is prior informed consent. Okay. Prior informed consent. Okay. The second one being access and benefit sharing. Okay. And the third one being, okay, so first of all we'll be looking at the third one also, but we'll be looking for the first at this one. Okay, prior informed consent. What is prior informed consent? PIC actually is not very specific to this act. It has been mentioned in the Rotterdam protocol also, that deals with the hazardous materials. तो prior informed consent का meaning है कि let's see, there are two places. The first one is, for example, manufacturer. Okay, manufacturer of medicines. Okay, manufacturer of medicines. And the second part of this act is the community. Okay, communities which grow, okay, grow, protect and preserve. Okay, plus also have associated traditional knowledge. Okay, traditional knowledge. That means, for example, there are a lot of medicine manufacturing companies in Himachal. Basically, Baddi is a town where a lot of these medicine manufacturing companies are located. So one of the major reasons that most of these companies are located in that area is the access to biodiversity. Okay? Because medicines are like medicines need a lot of herbs and all these medicinal plants to be made, right? So in hilly areas, basically, the biodiversity is very high. Okay? So that provides these companies with the access to a huge biodiversity. Okay? So these communities which reside in these hilly areas, they also grow, protect and preserve. They can be said to have the first, they can be said to be the first line of access between the commercial entity and the biodiversity. Okay. So, and they also have associated traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge means how to use a specific herb. Okay? Like in hilly areas, if you go and if you are injured, so you will be given some let's put on this lotion of this leaf, a lotion derived from this leaf, and you will be fine. Like a very basic example being neem. Okay? So neem can be used in a lot of medicinal purposes. Okay. So similarly, all the biodiversity. Okay? This is biodiversity. Okay? In the form of flora and fauna. flora and fauna. So all the biodiversity, the access to all the biodiversity, okay? So these people, these communities or these people have been granted with the rights of first access, the right of first access to the biodiversity, okay? These communities. Now, if a medicine manufacturing company, for example, wants to access this biodiversity, okay? So there need to be prior informed consent. Prior means first, means prior to something, prior to happening something. Informed, that means these communities need to be informed so that they can make a decision about providing access to a specific biodiversity to that medicine manufacturing company. In the sense, if a medicine manufacturing comes and says that we will be using some specific plant or animal for the use of for the manufacturing of some specific medicine, then these communities need to be made aware of the impact that medicine manufacturing might have on that specific biodiversity. Okay? So that means the consent that these communities give to this medicine manufacturing company should be an informed consent. Okay, so that means the access to biodiversity by this company, the access to this biodiversity by this company needs a prior informed consent from the communities that have been protecting, preserving and growing that specific biodiversity in that specific area. Okay, so the very foundational aspect of Biodiversity Act or preservation of biodiversity is prior informed consent. Okay, so I hope you understood that. Let me remove it now. Okay, we are doing BD A 2002, right? The second most important point was access and benefit sharing. Access and benefit sharing. Okay. So as we said, again, the same diagram, biodiversity in the form of flora and fauna, the communities, okay? These are communities and these are the manufacturing companies. Okay, these are manufacturing companies. Now, what is access and benefit sharing? For that, there is an NBA, National Biodiversity Authority, state level पे state biodiversity boards and local level पे क्या है? Local management committees, ठीक है? या biodiversity management committees, LMC or BMC both are same. It is a pyramidal structure. Okay, it is a pyramidal structure where NBA is at the top. फिर every state has its own biodiversity board, and at the local level, biodiversity management committees also exist. Now, if this manufacturing company got the prior informed consent from these communities, okay, if they got prior informed consent, they will be having access to this biodiversity for manufacture of some special medicine. Okay, this is how PIC works. Now comes the access and benefit sharing clause. This act mandates, and also Convention on Biodiversity also mandates through the Nagoya Protocol, that this company which is using this for commercial purposes should provide benefit arising out of, okay, for example, they made an XYZ medicine by using the biodiversity from here. Now this company made some profit of, for example, $1,000. A hypothetical situation. Okay. Now this company necessarily needs to share a part of that profit to these communities. This is called benefit sharing. How? These communities provided access to the biodiversity and this company will provide benefit sharing. Okay. So it is a very fair, equitable and just law in the sense that it provides a share of the benefit that has arisen from that specific biodiversity to that community. Okay, so that is called access and benefit sharing. So this was the original act. Okay, now we'll be looking what are the changes that have been made into this act through the amendment bill. Okay, right. So Cartagena Protocol on biosafety is about that if there's a transfer of a living modified organism, okay, between two countries. Living modified organism means for genetically modified some species, for example, like BT brinjal or anything. So why this Cartagena Protocol exists at the first place? Very important and very easy to understand is the presence of invasive species. What do invasive species do? Invasive species do not have any natural predator in the ecosystem that they invade, right? Invasive species का meaning क्या है कि if a species that is not native to a community is brought into that community, then it will be not having any natural predator. Okay, that means they will be able to grow unchecked, right? Like one of the very important invasive species is pigeon or house lizard also. The pigeon was not native to India, it was somehow brought from Persia. Okay, but pigeon did not have any like natural predator in India, so it has grown abound. Now and another important example is, for example, some genetically modified plant is being grown in USA. A specific study has been completed in USA on the impact of that genetically modified plant. But that study has not been performed in India as to what will be the impact in Indian ecosystem of that specific genetically modified plant. If that genetically GMO plant is brought in India, so we are not aware of what effects it will have in the ecosystem, right? For that, a Cartagena protocol was brought in. Cartagena protocol mandates that there should be a prior informed consent, again PIC, okay, between the countries, okay, for example USA and India. Okay, there should be a prior informed consent between the countries if a living modified organism is being moved. LMO, okay, if a living modified organism is being moved from one country to another, okay, there should be a prior informed consent, right? For that is called biosafety. Okay. And then Nagoya Protocol, of course, it talks about the access and benefit sharing. So I hope you understood the whole act and the evolution of the act. Now we will be going into what kind of changes this act has brought that has led to the criticism of this amendment bill that was introduced in 2021. Okay. The features of original act. Okay. This is the structure of biodiversity, like authorities, NBA, National Biodiversity Authority in Chennai. फिर every state has its own state biodiversity board and biodiversity management committees. Okay. These are the major changes that we are going to look at. Changes made by the bill. The first change that was made in the bill was entities. So for like to provide access to foreign companies, okay, foreign entities, there were some specific regulations in the original act. Okay, now there has been a change has been made into that, like which entities can access the biodiversity of India with approval from NBA. In the original act, it was foreign individuals, NRIs, companies not registered in India, and companies registered in India and having non-Indian participation, ठीक है, in the capital or management. मतलब इन चार companies को allowed था to access the biodiversity of India, ठीक है, biodiversity of India after approval from NBA, ठीक है, okay. But this bill makes a change into the last clause, companies registered in India and having non-Indian participation. There's a change being made through the bill. The bill says that companies registered in India which are foreign controlled companies as under Companies Act 2013. So let's get a bit of deep into it. How this change is going to affect, right? How this change is going to affect. ठीक है, तो original act said that companies, okay, registered in India, okay, in India, okay, plus having foreign participation, okay. This was the clause in original act. Now the bill makes a change that companies registered in India, okay, companies registered in India okay, companies registered in India which have foreign control as mentioned under Companies Act 2013. Now this is a very important point to note here. The Companies Act 2013 mentions that such foreign controlled companies can be registered in India and can have complete ownership of a foreign individual. Okay, they can have a complete ownership of a foreign individual. That makes this clause very problematic in the sense that this talks only about having foreign participation, and this can have a foreign management at, like, the whole management can be a foreign entity. Okay, that means a foreign company can register in India with no management, though no Indian management, and then it can directly have access to Indian biodiversity. That makes the clause problematic. Okay, okay. So, now second important point to note here was in the original act, prior intimation required to State Biodiversity Board. For which activities was prior intimation required to State Biodiversity Board? So first of all, activities were obtaining biological resources occurring in India for commercial utilization, okay, and there was an exemption. The exemption was for VADs and Hakims, okay, for VADs and Hakims. This bill makes this change and includes practitioners of Ayush. Okay, so these VAD and why this is problematic? Because VAD and Hakims used to reside in that specific area, right? And they can be called as a conserver or grower or people having access to the traditional knowledge, okay, yeah, associated knowledge of the biodiversity. So they can be considered as a rightful owner or rightful person to have an access to biodiversity for sustenance of their own lives. Because Vads and Hakims used to, for centuries, they used to have this traditional knowledge and access to the biodiversity, and they used it for treating the local ailments. But now practitioners of Ayush have been granted, okay? And as we know, Ayush is a growing commercial field, okay, and if we provide exemption for all practitioners of Ayush, then what can happen? An untenable exploitation of the biodiversity can take place. Okay. Okay. And other exemption was, one very important point is codified traditional knowledge. Exemption. Okay. Another exemption was okay. In the earlier act, the exemption from the intimation, matlab, if someone wants to access a specific biodiversity resource or the associated traditional knowledge, then they have to intimate to the State Biodiversity Board for that, excluding certain specific things, okay, like use by local people and communities, okay. But now an exemption has been added, that is codified. This is very important to understand. Codified traditional knowledge. That means anyone can now go to have access for codified traditional knowledge. Now there's a very important term, codified. Okay? The government might have thought, okay, if we want to increase the penetration or the reach of the codified traditional knowledge like Ayurveda and all, then we need to provide access to common people about that traditional knowledge. So they added this term, codified traditional knowledge. But the problem is that the bill does not define what kind of knowledge is called codified traditional knowledge, because the problem arises here. Sorry. The problem arises here. What happens is, in every local area, what Biodiversity Act 2002 did was, it established biodiversity management committees in all the local communities, okay, local areas, like the third level of governance, right? So NBA, State Biodiversity Board, and Biological Management Committees, a committee that will be formed at the Gram Panchayat area or Gram Panchayat level. So these biodiversity management committee was mandated to maintain a very important point, maintain the register of biodiversity plus associated knowledge. Okay. That means these biodiversity management committees have maintained registers which have codified all the biodiversity in that area and the associated knowledge of that biodiversity, right? So since the bill does not define what is codified traditional knowledge, all this knowledge has been codified in the specific registers. So this all can be considered codified traditional knowledge, and the companies can demand unrestricted access to this. Okay, and that is a problematic thing, because that will devoid the people of because the people are the owner. The local communities which have developed this traditional knowledge over centuries are the rightful owners of that traditional knowledge, right? And if the companies get access to that, they might commercialize and they do not even have to share the benefit arising from it. Okay, so that is one major problem. Another important point is approval for IPR. IPR means intellectual property rights. Okay, intellectual property means the intangible property that arises out of knowledge systems. Okay, like the knowledge of traditional medicine is an intellectual property. Okay, so approval for IPR. Original act required NBA approval for applying for IPR also. Now, if you want to apply for IPR, okay, for example, if some company, okay, or if some company develops some kind of intellectual property for the access and utilization of some biodiversity resource, for example, a herbal plant, then they will have to file a patent, right, for that specific intellectual property, that they specifically own the intellectual property rights of that specific method of preparing a medicine. Earlier, for application of an IPR, also NBA approval was required. Now that has been done away with, and now only for the commercial utilization, okay, for the commercial utilization of that IPR, NBA will be required to be consulted. Okay, that means पहले क्या था कि if someone develops an intellectual property, ठीक है, या specific formulation, specific method of processing a herb or plant, so they will be needing the prior approval of NBA. Now that has been done away with, and only when IPR is being granted, ठीक है, when IPR is being granted, then an approval from NBA is required. So why is this problematic? Because what happened earlier was, if you have access to some biodiversity resource and you developed some formulation, for example, okay, to develop this formulation, to apply for IPR, okay, NBA approval was required, National Biodiversity Authority approval was required. Now that is not the case. Now you can develop a formulation, you can apply for IPR. Now the agency which is processing your IPR that will be required to take the approval of NBA. That will be required to take the approval of NBA. That means now you can go for infinite kind of formulations without interference of NBA. Okay? Without interference from NBA. That means you can utilize the biodiversity resource, the companies can utilize the biodiversity resource to their own whims and fancies and develop formulations without even intervention from NBA. Okay, so one change that has been made is this. Another important point is benefit sharing. This is the most important change that has been made that can be problematic for the local or indigenous communities. How? The original act requires benefit sharing for commercial utilization, biosurvey, research and bio-utilization. Okay? The original act required benefit sharing. Benefit sharing, as we understood right now, okay, what is benefit sharing? Okay? Commercial utilization, biosurvey, research and bio-utilization. The bill removes the need to share the benefits from research, biosurvey and bio-utilization. That means now only commercialization of a biodiversity resource will be needing approval from NB. Will be having this necessity to share the benefit arising out of the commercial utilization of a resource to the local indigenous communities. Earlier, what the process was, even for conducting a biosurvey or for research purposes, also the benefits that arise from that research in form of intellectual property can be shared. It need to be shared with the specific communities. Okay, now what happened was, for example, a research is conducted on some specific biodiversity resource and that research leads to formation of some important intellectual property, right? Formulation or anything. Now what happened was, in original act, that intellectual property right was collectively held by the researchers and the local communities as well. Okay, and when some commercial company wants to utilize that specific intellectual property in the form of formulation or something, so they will have to share the benefit with the people, because the people are collective owner with the researcher. Now that has been done away with. Now what is the process? Now only the research, the benefit sharing from the research has been exempted. Though the researcher will be having its intellectual property, he is not bound by any law to share that intellectual property with the indigenous community. That means if the commercialization of that resource happens, then only the researchers will get paid. Okay, that is the problem. And decriminalization of offenses, because the bill decriminalizes all the offenses and instead puts a penalty of rupees 1 lakh to rupees 50 lakh. Okay, no one is going to be jailed. Matlab, it has been decriminalized. It is no more a criminal offense under IPC or CRPC. Okay. So that was about the changes in the Biodiversity Act that are being brought by the Biodiversity Amendment Bill 2021, which is pending with the Joint Parliamentary Committee. Joint Parliamentary Committee means a committee headed by containing both the members of Rajya Sabha and the members of Lok Sabha. Okay? So the bill is pending with the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and it was recently in news for the criticism, because of criticism as the activists and environmental activists and the local communities have been doing against it. And I believe NBA or Biodiversity Act, these are very important from prelims point of view. So one must remember these specific Cartagena Protocol, Nagoya Protocol, CBD, where is NBA, what is the role of SBB, State Biodiversity Boards, and what is the role of Biodiversity Management Committees and all. So I hope you understood. If you have any questions remaining, kindly reach me out in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to help.